Brickyard live show, whether you're joining us on Spotify, YouTube, after the fact. We appreciate you joining us. And we're here to break down every single game that happened on Christmas in the first Christmas edition of the NFL. Is it taking over the NBA? Then we're going to go down every single game from week 17 already. There's only 2 weeks left of football, so savor the flavor while you can because the playoffs are right around the corner. Then we're also going to go around the top 5 teams in the NFL and more news. Don't want to miss any of it, but we had the first experience with Netflix and it was a smash hit. I mean, the most streamed games of all time on Netflix.
Yeah, we broke the streaming record with the Christmas games with the Chiefs, Steelers, Texans, Ravens. 65 million people tuned in between the two games combined, and an average viewership of 24 million, which broke the previous record, which was the playoff game of the Chiefs and Dolphins in January. So, massive hit for them. They kind of owned Christmas. I know that the NBA had some huge games as well, not necessarily overshadowed, but we got to start out with the Chiefs and Steelers game, a game that the Steelers on the in the midst of their absolute gauntlet of games facing the Eagles and Ravens and Chiefs, and then next week ending with the Bengals and the Chiefs who just can't be stopped. Patrick Mahomes just dominated on Christmas.
Patrick Mahomes dominated on Christmas and waiting for the exact right moment to do so. And I feel like Steelers teams, when they look good sometimes, they'll look really good at some points during the regular season. And even when they're at their peak with Big Ben, AB, and Le'Veon Bell, sometimes they would just run into, I don't know, a team like the Patriots or just a better team sometimes and look completely lost. And it's kind of been the Mike Tomlin special over the past few years, which is super consistent, is never going to have a losing season. But then you get into these important games where you're fighting for your playoff lives, literally, where you're trying to get your division lead, trying to escape the Chiefs until the third round of the playoffs in the conference championship. And then you get out here and you get absolutely dominated. And now Russell Wilson having 2 turnovers in this game didn't help at all. And then starting to see some frustration from the Steelers with Cam Hayward saying, when 10 guys are all doing their job and one of them isn't, it's basically like we did all of that hard work for nothing. Paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he meant there. And now people are trying to skip trying to figure out who he's talking about, whether it's Russell Wilson, whether it's someone like Minka Fitzpatrick with some of his blown coverages, or maybe Patrick Queen. Some people are saying, hey, there's a reason why the Ravens let him walk, but there's a little bit of trouble in paradise. And then one person who's extremely frustrated was TJ Watt. The Chiefs are allowed to hold. Holding's not a penalty for them. So they just held TJ Watt all day and he wasn't able to do anything. And you could see that line and that team get frustrated. Are the Steelers just on their way to another epic implosion? And are we going to witness maybe the worst playoff game in NFL history with Steelers and Texans becoming a reality?
Yes, and yes. I mean, you think about it, of all the teams that are going to enter the playoffs this year, the Chiefs, right? They're going to be able to rest their starters next week now that they've clinched the first round bye. And then the Ravens, if they can clinch, they might be able to rest some starters in the second half. They might have a little bit of an easier time. The Steelers are facing four teams to end the season who are either the number one seed or the number two seed or division rivals at this point. So they're going to end if they beat and they lose to the Bengals. They're going to enter this losing four of the last five of the last 7 games. So you're talking about a team that at one point was flirting with the first round bye, and ever since the Ravens game, they fell to the Browns. They had a really close game with the Bengals, blew out the Browns again, and then Eagles, Ravens, Chiefs, and then now Bengals, a team that they could lose to. They've had just such a gauntlet. Their offense is just so inconsistent. Like Russell Wilson either looks like Russell Wilson of say 2020. I won't say 2019 quite, but looks like vintage Russ is at some point. And then other times he looks like the Nathaniel Hackett Russell Wilson. where he just makes these boneheaded decisions. The fumble to start the game was disgraceful. And then throwing a pick in the end zone, he's part of the reason why they lost. I think the Chiefs also just proved that they were a superior team. I mean, they ran all over them. We saw Xavier Worthy getting some carries as well. We saw him get out in space and getting some yak yards as well. So part of this is about the Chiefs and how good they are, and why everyone who has doubted him are an idiot because Patrick Mahomes hasn't thrown a pick since the Buffalo Bills game. Um, but I also think it speaks to the Steelers because this is what happens every time. Like clockwork, they either start really hot and cool off, or they start really bad and then they get hot at the end. But either way, it ends up in the same thing, losing in the first round.
Yeah, and it's kind of like felt it's almost similar to how like Russ was after the Legion of Boom era in Seattle, where he would just have like seasons where he would start really cold, start really hot, and then at some point during the season, he would turn it on to an MVP level for like 6 weeks, and people would be like, "Oh, is Russ finally gonna enter the MVP conversation like another quarterback does?" And then they kind of level out those numbers after like a couple really hot weeks of MVP football, and then he's kind of just simmered down at this point. So it's like the problem is they're going to be in the divisional round if they play the Texans because the Texans' weakness is the offensive line and the Steelers' strength is their pass rush at this point. And if you're going up against the worst offensive line in the playoffs at this point with the Houston Texans, CJ Stroud, who ever since he tried to sun Caleb Williams has been through hell. I mean, it's been one of the biggest fall offs from year one to year two in NFL history. I mean, my God, if Carson Wentz was ran out of Philadelphia after dragging literally the string quarterback from Wichita State, who is a quarterback as a wide receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles, and that guy gets run out of town, what is going to happen to CJ Stroud this year if you get to the playoffs and then the Steelers are going to have what over under 10 sacks in that game? Absolutely turn it into a house of horrors. And then the Chiefs are probably going to have to end up facing the Pittsburgh Steelers there in the second round. Then we're probably going to get Ravens and Bills. So we're going to have one blowout, and then we're going to have one absolute war for the right to lose in Kansas City.
Yeah, pretty much. And I think the CJ Stroud thing's a real thing because the Chiefs game, the Chiefs took care of business. They clinched the one seed. On the other side, that Ravens and Texans game was disgraceful. On one side, we saw who could be very well be the MVP and probably the closest team to the Chiefs in the Ravens. And then the complete opposite. The Texans scored 2 points. 2 points, which has only happened 4 times in NFL history. And I can look through and see which teams had scored those 2 points and where they ended up. None of them ended up in the Super Bowl. I'll tell you that. None of them ended up winning playoff games. In fact, none of them made the playoffs at that point. But here we are with the Texans. And the thing that kills me about CJ Stroud is I know CJ Stroud's a good quarterback. I know that at his best, he is probably a top 10 quarterback. But last year, the big thing that he had going for him was that he didn't turn the ball over. He had 5 picks on the year, and it took him until I believe week 8 to throw his first interception. And then in this season, he's got 12 interceptions. He hasn't been seeing the ball well. He's been sacked a bunch. He's going to end up finishing with 60 plus sacks on the season. And it's ever since this Caleb Williams moment. So I don't know whether or not Caleb Williams cursed him, if part of the Bears, when they shook hands, rubbed off on him. But that's essentially what I'm seeing at this point.
Yeah, no, some of the marmalade from their paws must have rubbed off on CJ Stroud there. But since the merger of 1970 of the AFL and NFL, there have only been 7 instances where a team has only scored exactly 2 points. So it's actually a really hard thing to do. I feel like it's harder to get shut out than to score 2 points. But only 7 times in NFL history has it happened where a team has only scored 2 points. And then ever since Joe Mixon got injured in the middle of the season and then came back for the Houston Texans, it's like it's been a totally different team here. And then you can't be a team that's so Joe Mixon reliant. I mean, this guy comes in September, and then people are like, "Oh my God, Joe Mixon is the savior for the Houston Texans. He's going to be the fantasy MVP this year. Everyone was so high on Joe Mixon, and then suddenly he gets injured. You have an injury to Nico Collins. You have Tank Dell go out for the season. Stephon Diggs is out for the season, and suddenly a team that was rated so highly coming into the year, we bought into the hype. So we have the Texans whisper on the show currently. Suddenly, they just fall apart here, and it really has to do, and it really all does come down to that offensive line because Joe Mixon in September, sure, he's maybe your fantasy MVP, but not in November, not in December. There's a reason why the Cincinnati Bengals let him go, not only because they have Chase Brown, who's excellent and was able to pick up Zach Moss as their backup running back, but like your main engine on offense can't be Joe Mixon if you want to make a Super Bowl run. That's just not how the NFL works.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. I think the curse of the Bears rubbed off on me when I cursed CJ Stroud. So I won't talk about the Bears anymore until I absolutely have to. But yeah, I agree. Like the Texans, I don't know if this is like the curse of Stephon Diggs. I know Stephon Diggs didn't do any favors for the Bills last year with all the locker room tension. I don't know if this is a chemistry issue. I don't know if this is a coaching issue with D'Amico Ryans. Bobby Slowick, who was like the hottest name in town last year, they look like they had something special. I don't know if this is a CJ Stroud issue, offensive line issue. It feels like it's all of the sorts. And I know Stephon Diggs is not playing right now, so I can't really blame him, but the Texans just look lost. Their offense has been bad. CJ Stroud has gone from a promising top 10 quarterback in the league to honestly one of the worst teams in the league. I'm going to try and find these teams that have scored 2 points and what they ended up becoming because that's not pretty. We don't want to be in this class of teams that have scored 2 points. We're in the conversation with the Jags of 2013, team that was absolutely terrible. The Bengals back in the day in the 90s, and then every other team that scored
Oh,
2 points. We're talking about teams like the Yellow Jackets of the 1929. I don't even know what
who?
team that's a part of. The Cardinals of the 1920s.
The St.
The
Louis
Pirates?
Cardinals?
No, not even the St. Louis Cardinals. I think they were somewhere. Chicago Cardinals. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about the Chicago Cardinals. That's how
Then the
far back we
Colts
go.
came after that, and then the Bears.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's ugly. And like all these teams that scored 2 points, these are all teams that were from like pre 1980. And if you know anything about football pre 1980, we're talking about like leather helmets. We're talking 7 to 6 Super Bowls. We're talking pretty much just quarterback's the best quarterback in the world if he throws 30 picks and 15 touchdowns. It's bad.
It's part MMA too.
Yeah, it's part MMA. People are literally dying on the field.
Leather helmets.
Leather helmets. It's just disgraceful. It is bad. But that's the class that the Texans have put themselves in. And whether we can point at CJ Stroud or D'Amico Ryans or Bobby Slowick or the offensive line, it's gross. And the fact that this team's going to be in the playoffs and they're already locked into the playoffs, shame on the Colts for Anthony Richardson. Shame on the Jaguars with Trevor Lawrence. And then the Titans were never meant to be there anyways. But shame on that division. They've already been the worst top 5 teams twice this year. And if I were to go
Yeah.
back, if I watched this game before I did my worst top 5, they'd be at number 1 again. Because how does the division winner score 2 points in a game? Not even a field goal. You have Kaimi Fairbairn, who's a fine kicker. You don't think he could have kicked a field goal? No. 2 points.
Not from
Disgusting.
70 yards.
But that's what they had to do. That's the only way they would
Yeah.
have scored because they couldn't get past the 50-yard line. It's terrible.
Like, does CJ
Absolutely.
Stroud ever get benched though? Like, because like this is the guy who's gonna be he has like one season left next year, or if he has another bad year in year three, he's not getting paid by anyone.
Somebody will probably pay for CJ Stroud.
Yeah.
There's always that one team. But I want us to focus more on the Ravens though, because the Ravens, Lamar Jackson, not in our mind, but in the media's mind, re-entered the MVP conversation. It was Josh Allen's is to win, and there's no way he could have lost it. Well, Lamar Jackson 10 of 15, 2 touchdowns, running for 90 yards, had 3 total touchdowns, breaks the all-time rushing record that Michael Vick had, and then odds go from minus 900 for Josh Allen to now Lamar Jackson's back in the driver's seat. How does this affect the MVP race? And then also him breaking Michael Vick's record. I saw that he was already at 6,500 yards. Do you think this is a guy that could end up with 50,000 passing yards and 10,000 rushing yards? I think we're in a serious class with Lamar in that conversation. Do you think that this game brings him back into the favorite of winning MVP?
I mean, he should have stayed the favorite, and I feel like people are so reactionary. It's like you have to zoom out and look at the whole picture. Like just because someone goes Superman for 3 games in a row doesn't mean that they're the MVP of the league. The MVP of the league is the most valuable player for the entire season. And Lamar Jackson has been the most valuable player for his team the entire year because he can't go a game without throwing touchdowns and them winning. Like that's an absolutely ridiculous idea. And the main argument has been, oh, Lamar Jackson has more help than Josh Allen, or Josh Allen should have won it last year, not Lamar Jackson, which also isn't a valid excuse. Just because he shouldn't have won last year doesn't mean Josh Allen should have won last year either. The MVP of the season last year was Tyreek Hill. It wasn't a quarterback. It wasn't Josh Allen. It wasn't Lamar Jackson. But if we're looking at it in retrospect this year, that doesn't mean that Lamar Jackson isn't the best quarterback in the league so far this year because he's only thrown 3 interceptions. He's going to have close to 850 rushing yards. And then he could very well have 50 passing touchdowns. He'd have to have a lot, but he could have 40, finish with 45 to 48 touchdowns, which is absolutely ridiculous here. And then also, he's leading a much tougher division than Josh Allen. I mean, the AFC North, the Browns are no joke on any given Sunday, and they give the Ravens trouble. And then the Steelers are no joke on any given Sunday. They've given Lamar a lot of problems, and they were leading the division for most of the season. Then the Ravens took that back, and then he had to score 40 points in not one, but 2 games to outduel Joe Burrow. I mean, this guy has to go head to head with Joe Burrow twice a year. He has to go head to head with TJ Watt and Mike Tomlin. He has to go head to head with Kevin Stefanski, who's a 2-time coach of the year winner. Who the hell does Josh Allen have to go head to head with in his division? That's intimidating. You have Drake May, who's a rookie, and Gerard Mayo, who doesn't know anything about dealing with the media. He's like, I don't know. You tell me. It's like, what do you mean? You're the head coach. This is ridiculous. And then you have Aaron Rodgers, who just had his GM and his head coach fired. And then he just came off his Achilles injury and he's tripping on mushrooms while playing football. And then you have Tua, who died in the middle of the season. And then you got him in the game that he died. And then you also got him after he came back, resurrected as a new blonde quarterback. Like, it's a much easier division. So you have to also look at the weight of competition that they're facing. And then Lamar has been doing this all year. Josh Allen has had plenty of games where he's disappeared. Like, okay, if he's going to consistently play at that level that he did for those 3 games all season, like that doesn't make him the MVP because he goes up against the Patriots. He throws for like what, 150 yards, a
Yep.
touchdown, an interception.
Yeah. The other thing with Lamar is he's one of only 5 quarterbacks to have 40 touchdowns and under 5 interceptions, something that Aaron Rodgers achieved 3 times, won the MVP each time, something that Tom Brady also accomplished. He won the MVP each time. He's leading the league in passing touchdowns. He's leading the league in touchdown percentage, yards per attempt, average air yards per attempt. He would break the record for QBR in a season if he were to win, which would be MVP. Highest QBR. He has and we look on the other side, he also has 850 rushing yards. He has 4 rushing touchdowns, which this is kind of where Josh Allen would take over because he has more rushing touchdowns. But he also has Derrick Henry, which I think hinders his rushing ability a little bit. But if he rushes for 75 yards these next 2 games, he's going to have 1,000 yards as a rusher for the third time in his career. He's already broken Michael Vick's record. He's revolutionized the game of football with his running. Now he's become an excellent passer. He's the best passer in the league statistically this season. And I feel like if any guy that we're going to talk about who's going to be put as his equal, who just needs to have playoff success, it's Lamar Jackson. Like Lamar Jackson, he's the only quarterback in the league that I see that does things that Patrick Mahomes could not do.
Yeah.
Patrick Mahomes is great, but he cannot run like Lamar Jackson. Nobody can. And I think that if we're talking about all-time greats of this generation, Lamar Jackson is a deserving three-time MVP, especially this season. QBR is 120. That's Madden numbers. He is having Madden level seasons right now. He deserves the MVP, simply put. He's leading in every statistical category.
Yeah, no, he definitely deserves the MVP. And like, if the argument back at that is record, okay, then Josh Allen isn't the MVP. It's Sam Darnold or Jared Goff. Like
Yeah.
they're the number one seed in their conference, and then also Saquon Barkley has a much more worthy argument for MVP than Josh Allen does because he's going to break Eric Dickerson's record. I mean, the guy rushed for over 100 yards in a quarter versus
Yeah.
the Washington Commanders, and then Jalen Hurts goes down, and we had to see Morgan Wallen's doppelganger come in and play quarterback here. But Saquon Barkley could very well smash Eric Dickerson's record. And, Josh Allen was the first quarterback to have a receiving touchdown, a passing touchdown, and a rushing touchdown in a game. And he's done some spectacular stuff this season, but he did it for 3 games. Saquon and Lamar have both been more consistent than him. And like Saquon needs to have some mentions in here. It's just the quarterback award every single year. And I know nothing's going to change, but like I feel like Saquon should be like a worthy, at least top 3 candidate in this one because he's also going to do something historic.
Yeah, absolutely. Plus, he's had 10 games of 100 rushing yards. He had one game against the Rams where he had 250 rushing yards. Like he's on this pace that is. We're looking at the last time we've seen someone like Saquon was 2011 Adrian Peterson, who won the MVP. Like the
Yeah.
MVP race, I'll give him like last year's MVP felt like they were trying so hard to give it to a quarterback, and I didn't agree with Lamar winning last year. But that's happened. It's gone. They made the choice. They voted for him. He won. Move on. This year, just because they made the mistake last year doesn't mean that he should be penalized this year. That's horrible logic. Saquon, we give it to Saquon. He has the best rushing season of all time. I'm okay with giving him the MVP. He's going to go down as one of the best running backs of our time, up there with the Derrick Henrys of the world. Lamar Jackson, you want to give it to him? Great. I think Josh Allen is going to win an MVP eventually, but you shouldn't give it to him over somebody else just so he wins an MVP. If he's a good enough quarterback, he's going to be contending for it next year. He was contending for it last year. Like, stop trying to hand it to them. He needs to earn the MVP. Lamar Jackson's had a
Yeah.
better season. He's going to be the MVP.
Yeah, he needs to take it for sure. And it would hurt me to see Ben Roethlisberger never win an MVP and then Josh Allen win an MVP without winning a Super Bowl. Like that would just hurt my soul as a football fan. Because like I've seen Ben Roethlisberger and back to back 500-yard passing games, which is like
Yeah.
someone else no one else does.
Yeah. Well, hopefully the writers get it right. But this game was an absolute destruction for the Ravens. I feel like most of this year their defense hasn't played great, but over the last few games their defense has played well.
Yeah.
Now we talk about the current AFC picture. Do you think the Ravens are the closest team to threatening the Chiefs for that throne?
Yeah, I feel like they are the closest, but for some reason I feel like they're not even that close at all. I mean, watching that Steelers game, didn't you have the feeling where the Chiefs could just score at will and get any third, fourth down that they wanted to? Like the Chiefs in
Yeah.
that moment, that game, I don't know if it was Christmas magic because I felt like there was a lot of magic in the air on Christmas yesterday. I don't know if it was the Christmas magic, but just seeing that game play out, I was like, oh no, the Chiefs are just gonna walk through the AFC because like realistically, they're probably going to play the Steelers and the Ravens. And honestly, I think, and they may not even make the playoffs, but I think the team that would give them the toughest fight in the AFC would be the Bengals. And I know the Bengals defense isn't up to par with what it should be this year, and its defense hasn't played well here, but just offensively with how good Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow has been, and with the way that Cincinnati just rises to the occasion versus the Chiefs in the game they had this year, honestly, I feel like that would be their toughest matchup in the AFC. But everyone else, I feel like they just John Harbaugh can't get it done versus the Chiefs. Derrick Henry would have to have the game of his life, but their defense just hasn't shown me enough for Baltimore. And then I don't think Buffalo will ever be an issue, at least going to Kansas City for them. So it's like, I really don't think the biggest threat for them's in the AFC. I think the biggest threat would be in the NFC. And there's one team in mind that I think is the only team that can beat the Chiefs this year.
The Chiefs scare me because their weapons this year are better than last year. Where you have Xavier Worthy, who's been excellent for you. Finally, have that speedy receiver that you wanted Kadarius Tony to be, and what a bust he was. Hollywood Brown's returned, and Hollywood Brown has played excellent for you since he's come back. DeAndre Hopkins is there. You have a deep physical receiver now. Travis Kelsey, although he's not the Travis Kelsey that once was, he's still good enough, and you still have Justin Watson there to complement Travis Kelsey. And then the running game, Pacheco's back. You have Kareem Hunt. So they have a good running back core. They have a great receiving core, which is what they didn't have last year. Last year was your chance to beat the Chiefs, and you didn't. And this team does feel historic. This team has already, to some extent, caught up to the Patriots, where they've made it to how many consecutive AFC title games at this point? I think we're on 8 already, which is what the
Yeah.
Patriots record was already. Patrick Mahomes has already had, I believe, 16 playoff wins. This is the dynasty of the 2020s. So I do think the Chiefs are the team to beat. Hot take, crazy. I think the Ravens can beat them. I think the Bengals can beat them. But honestly, if I had to put my money on it now, the Chiefs probably are going to three-peat. And I don't think that's the worst thing. I think they deserve it at this point,
Yeah, I think they deserve it, but I do think there
as
is
bad
one
as it is.
team in the NFL this year that can beat the Chiefs. And I think that team is who better to beat the Kansas City Chiefs than Toyota Thon Love, Green Bay, Kansas City in the Super Bowl here. Like, honestly, I think the Packers of any team have the best shot. They still have a healthy enough defense this year. Their weapons and Romeo Dobbs, Jaden Reed are both getting healthy. Also, with Josh Jacobs like hitting his stride, playing his best football of the season. So honestly, if we get a Packers and Chiefs Super Bowl with how Jordan Love has played during Toyotathon, I feel like Toyotathon Love has been the closest quarterback to Patrick Mahomes that we've seen in the regular season, at least stylistically. So I could see one hell of a shootout in that game. The Lions defense is just a little bit too banged up. And then I just don't trust Philadelphia. I feel like it'd be the same scenario as the rematch with San Francisco. I don't think the NFL actually wants to see that. And I think, Minnesota, it's nice you did it with Sam Darnold, but how far can they actually go? And is Sam Darnold going to beat Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl? Is he going to lead a drive down the field when you need it? Probably not. So I honestly think it's probably going to be the Packers that has the best shot to beat Kansas City. And it's not even just like talent wise. I just feel like it is like Jordan Love, I feel like won't get caught up in the moment. He's not going to get too afraid. And his signature moment was beating Patrick Mahomes on Sunday Night Football in his rookie season when he started playing.
That's true. I mean, I don't know if I agree that the Packers could beat the Chiefs. I think the Chiefs are just a better cohesive unit. I like their weapons better at this point. But I think that if we're looking at the NFC, I would agree that the Packers are probably their best bet simply because the Lions and Eagles are banged up. And then anybody else is fraudulent. I don't trust the Vikings either. So I think in the NFC, the Packers maybe are their best threat. AFC, I think I would still take the Ravens or Bengals over the Packers just because I think they have more firepower. Bengals are more familiar with the Chiefs, so therefore I think they can contain them more. Um, and then if Lamar can stand up in the moment, which is a big if, but if he can, they played pretty great against each other last year. It came down to, I think, a field goal to decide the AFC title game. So I still think that it's going to be competitive with those two teams. But Packers, if we're talking about NFC teams, I'd agree that the Packers are probably their biggest threat out of the NFC.
Yeah, and I think it's just with the way that Matt
Unfortunately,
LaFleur
I wish
has.
it was the Lions, to be honest.
Yeah, I wish it was the Lions too. Like, if they had Aiden Hutchinson and Anzalone, I definitely think they could go toe to toe with the Chiefs. And their defense didn't look like completely like clueless. And while they have had a lot of injuries on their defense, I don't think the Lions have looked completely inept on defense. They really just had the one game where Josh Allen scored 48 points.
Yeah. Well, Christmas wise, Christmas proved that opening the boxes again, the Chiefs are still very good. Lamar is still very good. And CJ Stroud got Cole, and so did Russell Wilson. And then the
Yeah.
Thursday night game that we're watching while we're recording this, we're locked into a very interesting, very fascinating, very cool 6-3 game in the third quarter. Um, yeah. Would you rather watch paint dry or watch the Seahawks Bears game?
I still think I'd rather watch Seahawks Bears.
I know my answer. Yeah,
I'll still
it's
take the Seahawks
not a
and
great
Bears.
game, but yeah, I'll take the Seahawks. It's bad, but we have football to talk about. Speaking of the Bears, Pete Carroll put his name in the hat. He said, "Bears, I'm interested." Mr. 74-year-old to be Pete Carroll. He wants one last shot at the NFL. Yes, that Pete Carroll, the Pete Carroll who coached the Jets in 1994, 30 years ago, back when OJ was innocent. The Patriots back before Bill Belichick, and then the Legion of Boom Seattle Seahawks. Yes, that Pete Carroll, the USC Trojan himself. He wants a shot back at Chicago, and Chicago says, "We're also interested." Pete Carroll, Caleb Williams, the Chicago Bears. How do you feel about the Chicago Bears led Pete Carroll Bears team in
Yeah.
2025?
Yeah, this would be great if it was 2009. Take me back in time, Chicago. I mean, you want someone who can be with Caleb Williams throughout a 15-year career. Okay, 15 years with the Chicago Bears. If you want stability and a long-term head coach, you're like, okay, let's go with the guy who's older than the required minimum distribution age in Pete Carroll. I mean, he just missed the RMD when they changed it from 72 to 73. The same year that they changed it and upped it a year, they're like, you know what? Let's go out there and get Pete Carroll, who has to start taking his required minimum distribution from his retirement plan. And yeah, oh yeah, by the time Caleb Williams' career is over, if he stays with the Chicago Bears the entire time and he works out at quarterback and Pete Carroll fixes all of your problems, Pete Carroll will be 90 if Caleb Williams only plays 16 more years. I repeat, Pete Carroll will be 90 years old. Can we start? I don't know. If you're at the age where you start have to take your required minimum distribution, can you be disqualified from being an NFL head coach? Can you be disqualified from running for president or political office if you're over the age of 73? I mean, what are you thinking? Sure, will he fix your defense? Yeah, but had it just run its course in Seattle? Maybe, but like someone who's that old coming over to take as your head coach, like at least like if he was 64, 79, that's not unreasonable. We've seen weirder things. Maybe they can get him on whatever they put Joe Biden on before the presidential debates. But this is an NFL head coach. He would have to do that every day where you're working long 14-hour days. I mean, he may have to retire in 3 years of being your head coach, and then Caleb Williams has to start over. This is a terrible idea.
I don't love it. Love it either. I think it's stupid. I think if you're going to go after a coach that's 73, wasn't there another 73-year-old head coach that was available not 2 weeks ago with Bill Belichick? Why wouldn't you get the 6-time Super Bowl head coach who's going to make that defense the best? But if I'm the Bears, why wouldn't I go and get one of the best offensive minded people in the league? Why wouldn't I be calling Ben Johnson? Hell, even Bobby Slowick. Give him a call, I guess, even though he's ruined his reputation at this point. I would look at a Bill Belichick over a Pete Carroll. And I think Pete Carroll's a fine head coach. It's not any disrespect. He's a Hall of Fame head coach, Legion of Boom, all respect, building Russell Wilson and Geno Smith. But at the same time, the Bears are a young team. I think they need a young bit of energy. If you want a Pete Carroll, the younger version of that is Mike Vrabel. You might as well get Mike Vrabel, who's in his early 50s, has won Super Bowls with the Patriots, played for the Steelers, is a Hall of Famer, I believe. Why not get Mike Vrabel, who I think at this point is a more modern head coach? He knows how to pick offensive coordinators as well. Mike Vrabel and Pete Carroll are not that much different as head coaches. I would have picked Mike Vrabel over Pete Carroll. Glad that Pete Carroll's interested, but the Bears go younger. When you're talking about Pete Carroll, when his career is over, Caleb Williams, he'll be 90 years old. Mike Vrabel is in his early 50s. We're talking 66, same age as Andy Reid. Make it make more sense. Go and get Mike Vrabel. Go out and get Ben Johnson. But don't go out and get this guy that by the time it's over is going to be literally farting dust if he's not already farting dust. What are we doing
Yeah.
here, Chicago?
Was he gonna have a walker on the sideline in 5 years?
Good God, does he have a life alert on the sideline next to his
Yeah,
play calling sheet? Like, think about it deeper than that, Chicago. This is why Chicago is so impoverished. It's because they think like this. They're like, oh, Pete Carroll, Super Bowl winning head coach. Yes, he's so smart. Yes, great head coach. But he's going to be 70 fucking 4. Put him in the GM position, not the head
yeah.
coach.
No, he's ready for a Tom Coughlin role right now. As like an analyst or an advisor in the back office, you can't be putting this man through rigorous 14, 13-hour days working in the office here. Like, it makes no sense at all. And like, also, he can't pick offensive coordinators. He can't. Whose idea was it to throw it instead of run it with Marshawn Lynch? Whose idea was it to keep the guy who gave Russell Wilson his worst years, and then he ended up going to Dallas. So it's like also with Mike Vrabel is he has the complete opposite problem. You know who he picked as his offensive coordinators in Tennessee? Matt LaFleur and Arthur Smith, both who turned out to be head coaches, one of them much more successful than the other, and handsomer too, and Matt LaFleur in Green Bay, who has one of the best offenses in the league. And then Arthur Smith got hired as a head coach. Those were both under Mike Vrabel. So Mike Vrabel has not only proven he can be a good head coach, but he's also proven that he can turn out head coaches under him when they're a defensive or offensive coordinator. Like two offensive coordinators from Tennessee were head coaches. Like that's pretty good.
Yeah, he's picked multiple head coaches that have all panned out pretty well. Mike Vrabel makes a lot more sense. He knows the guys. He's a smart guy.
But
But enough about the
Ron
Bears.
Rivera's
Right now, we're
also
gonna
out
watch them
there.
lose to the Seahawks. Yeah, let's get a guy who actually has dementia. Let's talk about football. Let's talk about the Week 17 games. We got so many. I mean, we got Saturday games, we got Sunday games, we had Wednesday games earlier this week. We got every week basically except for Friday. Saturday games, we got a bunch of good ones. Starting with the Chargers and Patriots. Now, this is a game I would look closer at than you think. Doesn't look like a great game on paper, but if you are a friend of this show and you know that we are history buffs on this show, you know that we love history. The Chargers have historically been destroyed by the Patriots. In fact, the last 10 games they are 2-8. The last game they did win, yes, 6 to nothing last year when the Patriots had one of the worst offenses in the league. And then this is the same team that in the Mac Jones Patriots era lost 45 to 0 as well. And then the list goes on. I just feel like in this game, it feels like a trap. The Chargers are favored at 4.5. The Patriots, they just had a good game against the Bills. They own the Chargers. It's in Foxborough. It's going to be cold. I'm actually going to pick the Patriots to beat the Chargers in this game.
Whoa. Really? That's crazy.
Shoot me.
I mean, this is like
Yep.
the Jim Harbaugh era. Like
Hmm.
we're finally out of like the Anthony Lynn. I mean, that's a name Chargers fans wish they could forget. We're finally past, you know, Brandon Staley here, and now the Chargers have a game up against the New England Patriots in New England. Yeah, it is going to be cold. It will be a interesting test for Drake May because he did play sneaky good against the Buffalo Bills. That touchdown pass that he had to Tayshaun Bude was a pretty good touchdown pass there. He dropped it right in the bucket between two defenders there. And then Patriots, players have been complimenting Drake May as the smartest player in the building. Not sure if that's a shot at the head coach. Not sure if it's a compliment for Drake May, or not sure if it's both of those. But one thing is for sure, Drake May is making waves. Players on the team respect him, so I can definitely see you picking the Patriots to win here. And I feel like I have to pick the Patriots to win because I feel like anytime we pick opposite of the Chargers, I'm always wrong. You have just a better pulse for this team than I do. I'm like called you the Kramer of the Cardinals, and that didn't turn out to be true after they lost to the Panthers. So I feel like I'm just cursed when it comes to picking Chargers games. Anytime I pick them to lose, they end up winning. Anytime I pick them to win, they end up losing. So I'm going to stay out of this one, and then I will trust your judgment that the Patriots will go out there and beat them.
It's just one of those things. Certain teams, no matter how bad they are, can beat one other team any given Sunday. The Patriots, any given Sunday, just beat the shit out of the Chargers. Chargers look small. I don't know if it's the cold weather. I don't know if it's the previous history with the Philip Rivers era and the Tom Brady era. I don't know if it's what voodoo magic they have, but the Patriots have always owned the Chargers. It even goes further back from the Patriots dynasty. They've just always owned the Chargers. The Chargers record
Yeah, and it'll be tough. I feel like the Chargers are, one of those teams where we talk about hurdles on the show. We talk about games that you need to win here. And, that's been like a common theme for the Detroit Lions. It's like teams they historically lose to Seattle. It took them a few years into the Dan Campbell era to come out there and beat Seattle, where Seattle gave them a lot of problems. They've given them a lot of problems historically, and they're able to get over that hurdle. Um, and when you're turning around a franchise, it's something you have to do here. But will the Chargers do it this year? Maybe they don't do it year one because you're kind of clinched getting into the playoffs, and the Patriots are, trying to build some momentum going into next year. So we'll see. I feel like it should be a good matchup,
I will
though.
not be silenced by the gods of the NFL. Patriots by a million, by the Chargers. They own them historically. As I mentioned, before the Patriots era, before Bill Belichick and Tom Brady walked through those doors, the Patriots have owned the Chargers. Patriots cover the spread. They win against the Chargers.
Bro, Cox needs to figure it out. I don't know what's going on. What are they doing in Arizona? The sun strikes again. Like it's not supposed to be this warm in December here. It's supposed to be -4 degrees.
Clearly. Clearly. Yeah, Cox Energy is gay as hell. Not a fan of Cox. Not Cox. I don't like Cox. Not a fan. Have to go on my fucking hotspot because God forbid the internet isn't actually fucking AIDS. God forbid in the fucking desert they don't have another fucking internet provider but Cox Communications. Give me. I'm going to my hotspot.
Yeah. Put on the hotspot. Is it the UFOs? Do you have a lot of UFOs in Phoenix that are popping up here? No. Looks like he's frozen. Um yeah, that was also a weird story. Why'd we suddenly have like UFOs popping up, and then it was everyone was like all the headlines from the news were like, "Oh my god, everyone's freaking about these UFOs." And then I didn't know a single person who was freaking out about them. Everyone it's like the media was trying to drum up like controversy and like make people nervous when everyone's like, obviously it's just the government. Like, we didn't actually believe you that's UFOs. You guys have put us through so much BS the past few years. Like, we're not, oh, everyone's freaking out about UFOs. Like, give me a break. Like, no one is freaking out about this.
I don't think people care that much, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't think it's that deep. I think they're good with it. People know that aliens exist. We don't need these drones to prove that. We know what it is at this point. We just, certain things are just a must. Other games on Saturday. This will be a huge game. Broncos and Bengals. If the Bengals win, they inch closer to getting that playoff spot. If the Broncos win, down go the Bengals, up go the Broncos. We'll see Bo Nix in the playoffs. Lucky us. Um, Bengals are favored at 3.5 at home. You think the Bengals win this one?
They have to. I mean, the Bengals, I mean, you started out slow in September and you lost some games that you shouldn't have down the stretch here. The Chargers game, and you should have at least won one game versus the Ravens. The Steelers game was a tough one as well. And then also losing to the Cleveland Browns here. So you have some winnable games, losing to the Patriots, and that's going to determine your season. But you still have Joe Burrow, who has been the best quarterback in the NFL all season long, outside of Lamar Jackson. If you look at the, touchdown to interception ratio, and then you also have the best wide receiver in football this year. The Bengals are going to be a team where they're in win now mode, where this is new territory for the Broncos. They're not supposed to be here. And with what we saw versus the Chargers, where they started to collapse a little bit, feel like the Bengals have the momentum to come out there and actually win this game. I mean, the NFL wants them in the playoffs. We don't want to see rookie Bo Nix. We want to see Joe Burrow in the playoffs. So I feel like we're going to get a good game out of the Cincinnati Bengals. They'll be able to just flat out outscore the Broncos in this one. And this is a message for the Bengals. Like, don't do it for the NFL. Don't do it just for yourselves to get into the playoffs for your own legacy. Do it for America, because this is what America deserves. America deserves to see Joe Burrow in the playoffs. America deserves to see Joe Burrow versus Josh Allen in the first round. And then they deserve to see Cincinnati versus Kansas City in the second round, and then Pittsburgh and Baltimore in the second round. And then a showdown, whether it is Lamar versus Patrick Mahomes or whether it is Josh Allen versus Patrick Mahomes. Like, this is just something where you have to come out there and understand this game is bigger than yourselves. Don't win it for yourselves. Like, you have to win this game for an entire nation. Like, no one wants to see
To,
Bo Nix in the playoffs versus the Bills in the first round. No one does at all.
to expand on that, think about the current state of America, right? We're in very divisive times, right? People are arguing about left and right Twix. People are arguing about political parties and who's better than the other. People are arguing about bathrooms and all these stupid things that America's arguing about. But what could they be arguing about instead? They could be arguing about who's better, Patrick Mahomes or Joe Burrow, Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. This could be a period of unity, what America needs, right? Unfortunately, 2024, you know, it's been an up and down year. But as somebody who speaks for the voice of America, a guy who knows what America needs, the backbone of society, dare I say, I think America needs Joe Burrow, and Joe Burrow needs America. I think you have Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals in the playoffs, and better things come to America. You start to see the divide slowly start to weaken, slowly start to close the gap, and that all happens on Saturday against the Broncos. Go out there and do this not just for you, Joe, not just for you, Jamar. Do this for America. Do this for
Yeah.
the united that we stand.
And you have to think of this as a situation where you're home alone. I mean, that field, you got to ice it out. You got to booby trap the Denver Broncos locker room. So the locker room, you have to fill it with ice there, and then maybe set up some blow torches in the locker room there, and then put some Christmas ornaments down in the shower there at halftime and when they're getting ready for the games. Like, you have to do everything you can. This is Home Alone edition. lost in Cincinnati. Bengals have to come out there and get it done. If they lose this game, they miss out on. If they win the next two games and the Broncos just beat the Chiefs because the Chief rested their starters, like it's something we'll have to live with, unfortunately. But if the Bengals straight up go out there and lose to the Broncos, that'll be even more disappointing.
That'll be extremely disappointing. Well, this game here, right? This the last game of the Saturday night slate. We have the Cardinals and Rams. Now, if things were to end today, right, the Seahawks are still in the mix here. But if the Rams win, I believe they clinch against the Cardinals. The Cardinals, they just lost to the Panthers, the Believeland Panthers. The Rams, they haven't looked great the last couple of weeks, but they are still winning games. They have the ugliest games so far this year. With a win, they clinch. Historically, the Rams have owned the Cardinals in the Kyler Murray era. We saw that playoff game in 2021. That was not very pretty. I think it continues here. Even though they have scored a combined 30 points the last 2 weeks, I think the Rams go out there, beat the Cardinals, and potentially see the last of Kyler Murray in Arizona.
Yeah, the last of Kyler in Arizona could be possible, especially after this game. And, they played each other earlier this year, and it was probably the Arizona's best game where they went out there, dropped 41 points versus the LA Rams here. But I do think this is a game that will be competitive, but it's going to be like a playoff game for the Rams. And they understand what's at stake here. And I just feel like the Rams are going to want it more than Arizona. Kyler, he just doesn't strike me as someone who cares enough or gets up enough to send his divisional opponent home. He's essentially knocked out of the playoffs, and the Rams, I feel like he could care less if they go to the playoffs or not here. So I feel like the Rams are just going to treat it like a playoff game. We just have to take care of business here. If we mess around, then we have a chance of facing Seattle if they beat Chicago 11-9. Then we may have to face them for the division in the last game, and then also risk injuries where we could rest someone like Stafford and Cooper Cup and have like limited reps for Puka Nakua and Kyron Williams and really step into a wild card game and be ready to go. Which you will need to be if you're going to be facing someone like the Packers or the Commanders in the first round here. So I just think that the Rams are going to look at this like a mini playoff game, getting them ready versus the divisional opponent. And just like Arizona doesn't really care. They're probably going to have a new coach, potentially a new quarterback next season.
Yeah, going into rebuild. There's a couple of good games in the Sunday slate, but I'm going to get the bad ones out of the way just because they're terrible. How about Vegas and New Orleans? Vegas proved to us that they don't know how to tank and they just know how to ruin their draft stock going from pick 1 to pick 6. We heard about it on Monday in the worst top 5. They are going to New Orleans to take on the lowly Saints, who have scored as many points these past weeks as we have. They scored 0 points against the Packers. Over under of a measly 37.5, over under of -1. Vegas and Saints. Who can tank more?
Honestly, I feel like the Saints are on a pretty good trajectory when it comes to that whole tanking aspect here, where Derek Carr makes one of the dumbest plays I've ever seen a quarterback make, where he tries to jump over two players. And then the Saints are like, you know what? Let's go ahead, prep all of our games in the freezer here. We'll be good to go. And then the Raiders are like, you know what? It's the end of the season. We have pride to play for, right? Where it's like, no, you don't. You need to get the best quarterback available. But I think Vegas is going to run the table and win their next two games. I think the Chargers take care of business versus the Patriots, and then you're like, you know what? We're pretty much locked into the number 5 seed. We're not going to move up or down too much here. So let's go ahead and rest some players and scoreboard watch a little bit versus the Raiders. And the Raiders are like, we got pride to play for. Who are we gonna like lose to? Aiden O'Connell's playing for a job next year. Brock Bowers is good enough to go out there and compete with the Saints, and I think they win that game. And potentially, you see a situation where they go from the number one pick to a historic run where they play themselves out of the top 5, top 10 picks in the draft.
That would be. I mean, they've already played themselves out of a top 5 pick. So what else can they do? If there's any team that doesn't know how to tank, it's the fucking Raiders. I was so good to them all season long. They were not on my worst top 5 list for 16 consecutive weeks. And then they emerge after beating the Jaguars, only for them to say, Zach Jameson, you are a fool. And I was a fool because I was like, no, the Raiders know what they're doing. Said no one ever the last 30 years. So that's my own fault. I take it on the chin. We move on. But maybe you're right. I have to pick the Saints to win this game because I'd like to think that they couldn't get any worse than their game against the Packers, where they scored as many points as I did on Monday Night Football. So I have to pick the Saints because the Raiders, I'd like to think, just given my 16 weeks of tomfoolery, will make amends for what they did to me last week and made me look like a complete jackass. So I guess I'll pick the Saints. I'll pick Spencer Radler and the magic of the New Orleans Saints to beat the Raiders because why not?
Yeah, no, you would think so. So, I think the Raiders win this one. I think they're just gonna go on a historic run as far as playing themselves out of a draft pick here and lose out on a top quarterback here, and then end up having to talk themselves into taking Quinn Ewers in the third or fourth round, which is probably going to be still way too high.
That sounds disgusting. How about the number one overall pick, the team that knows how to tank, apparently, even though for the long time it didn't look like they were tanking? How about the New York Giants? They host the black Tim Tebow, Indianapolis Colts, and Anthony Richardson. The Colts are favored at a touchdown with 7.5. Do you think with the Colts being in contention that they will obviously win this game and continue on their path towards the playoffs? Or will the Giants also not know how to tank and will they win this game? I think, in my humble abode, that the Giants they can't tank because they just suck. They have Tim Boyles of the world and the Tommy DeVitos and the Drew Locks of the world. They're not tanking. They're just genuinely terrible at football. Brian Dayball, if somehow you could be even more bald than bald, he would be. You would see his veins if it was possible with how bald this man has become because of the Giants. And I think that continues. Colts win.
Yeah. No, I think the Colts win too. Like, how do you roll out someone like Tim Boyle, someone like Drew Lock, and then expect to win football games here? Like, honestly, I think the best Canadian football team could compete with this Giants team, or maybe someone like Georgia last year could go out there and beat this Giants team. Probably not, because they're NFL players, but you get the idea because this has been one of the worst teams in the league this year. Their defense started out pretty good, and as all defenses do when you don't have an offense, has slowly just deteriorated and given up. Brian Burns wondering why he signed to all that money. Bobby Okereke counting the days on when he can go ahead and then leave the New York Giants for a team like the Kansas City Chiefs, Pittsburgh Steelers, or a team that actually needs him, like the Detroit Lions here. So yeah, I don't see the Giants going anywhere. Feel like Jonathan Taylor can have one 40-yard rushing touchdown and the game will be over.
I think that is very fair. One thing about Tim Boyle, before I move on to the next terrible game, um, in college he threw one touchdown to 13 interceptions, and yet he spent 6 years on six different NFL teams. He got drafted,
What?
and Tim Boyle. You want to look at his college stats? He started 20 games. He had one touchdown to 13 interceptions, and he's had a 6 year career in the NFL. What
Was he
does he know that
drafted?
we don't? I believe he was. I'll pull up Tim Boyle if I can. But even if he wasn't drafted, where did you see the tape and go, yep, this guy's going to be on an NFL roster? Somebody
Yeah.
did that. He was, in fact, undrafted, thank God. However, he had played for Kentucky and UConn, and he has not won a game in the NFL. And I said that if I saw him on this list, he would be on the worst top 5. So don't show me Mr. Tim Boyle. Another terrible game, Tennessee and Jacksonville. Jacksonville mistakenly lost this last week against the Raiders, continuing on their tanking run. Tennessee played a good game against the Colts. They put up 30 points. Tennessee is favored by a point, over under of 39.5 in the AFC South bout.
Yeah. Um I think Tennessee comes out and wins this game. They've had some they've had a little bit of a tough run of it here, but you have, Mason Rudolph, who's played better football, I feel like, than Mac Jones, at least the past couple years here in the past few weeks. And then Tennessee had that offensive spurt at the end of the game where they ended up making the scoreboard look respectable, at least versus the Indianapolis Colts, where they made it a 30-38 game. So I do feel like I have some belief, at least in the Tennessee Titans, that they're going to go out here and then mess up their tanking odds, which is funny because they're the team that needs the quarterback here, but they're going to end up winning this game and then hurt their chances of getting a quarterback.
Yeah, I agree. I think Tennessee wins this game. It would be funny if the Jaguars did get the first overall pick so that they could pick another edge rusher with small arms. So we'll see what they do with that pick ultimately. But Tennessee should win. Don't see it being very competitive, but should be a fun NFC game. And then let's talk about some of the better games. We have Buffalo at New York, the Battle of New York. Buffalo is favored by 9.5. Josh Allen trying to resubmit himself as the MVP favorite in this game. But we also know that in the past, especially the last few years, he has struggled in New York with this New York's team. Do you think this is a situation where he continues his struggles with the New York Jets or continues on his MVP run?
I feel like he continues playing fine and the Buffalo Bills win this game because he's had games where he's thrown for like 150 and 200 yards and like two touchdowns and an interception. They end up going out there and blowing teams out there just with how dominant Khalil Shakur and James Cook have been in the passing game and out of the backfield making plays here. So I feel like with the Jets, to beat the Bills, you need a little bit of magic, and part of that magic is having a terrible quarterback like Zach Wilson. That's when they started to pick it up versus the Buffalo Bills on 9/11 when they had that magical kick return here. So I do think that with Aaron Rodgers there, it's just such a dour Jets team that the Bills end up just winning this game. And I feel like it's kind of similar to the Patriots game where they just end up cruising and get it done, where it's not too tough for them.
I respect that. I'm going to pick the same score. Then we go to the NFC East. We have a classic Cowboys and Eagles matchup in Philadelphia, over under 39.5, and the spread of a touchdown. Eagles had fell to the Commanders this past week, and then the Cowboys. Um, they played some competitive football this past week. Looked pretty good with Cooper Rush. We had talked about him versus Dak Prescott. They come out and play each other. Cowboys coming off a win against the Bucks and Panthers, two in a row. Um, in this game, do you think this is more of an Eagles domination with Saquon Barkley, or more about the Cowboys and Cooper Rush and the matchup they've had the last few weeks?
Yeah, I think it's going to be more about the Eagles in this game because CD Lamb has been shut down for the remainder of the season due to a shoulder injury, more as they just want to preserve CD Lamb. They're out of the playoffs here, so they really just don't want a chance of him getting hurt here. So I feel like with CD Lamb out, who else is Cooper Rush going to throw the ball to? I mean, he's basically your 75% of your offense. The other, you know, 15% is Rico Dowdle, and then you just have randos like Cedric Wilson and Brandon Cooks and Dalton Scholes occasionally when he feels like showing up contributing. So it's like versus the Philadelphia Eagles off defense that's been one of the best in the league this year. It's like without CeeDee Lamb, this is going to be a tough matchup, especially when the Eagles are going for the number one seed and hoping Detroit loses next week in week 18. So I do think that the Philadelphia Eagles end up coming on top this one. Feels like it's going to be like a 34-14 type of game for them.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that the luck has run out with the Cowboys. They're done for the season. They're not making the playoffs, so they go out, they fall to the Cowboys, but I do think it's going to be more competitive than that. I'm going to say, we'll say 23-17. And then,
23-17.
yeah. And then we have Panthers and Tampa Bay. Tampa just got a fell to the Cowboys this past week, and then the Panthers beat the Cardinals in overtime. Bucks are favored at 7.5, over under of 48.5. Still looking to clinch that NFC South. with them favored by a touchdown. In this game, I do think it's going to be competitive. I would take the Panthers to cover the spread, but I do think that Tampa is on a mission here. They are looking to clinch this division. So I will take Tampa to beat the Panthers. I'll say 27-24.
27-24. Yeah, I like that score here. I do feel like over the past few years, though, that the Panthers have given the Tampa Bay Buccaneers trouble. I mean, you think back to that battle that they had with the Panthers last year where Eddie Pinheiro comes out, ends up kicking a field goal to win that game. And the Panthers have been playing really good and really competitive football where they're not necessarily looking for a top draft pick. So their idea of a successful season is just taking something to hold on to, taking some momentum into next season, and it feels to much lesser degree very Detroit versus Green Bay in the last week of the season, where Detroit ended up knocking out Green Bay and ruining their hopes of making it to the playoffs. So I do feel like this is a game where the Panthers actually come out here, upset the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and make their playoff chances a lot harder going into next week. They would need Atlanta to lose both of their next two games here, and they would need a win in week 18 here. So I do think Carolina can come out here and upset Tampa.
I think that's definitely possible with how Bryce Young's played. So interested to see how it goes. I'll pick Tampa. You pick Carolina. We'll see how it pans out. And then this game, we don't have to talk about this very much. We got Dolphins and Browns. Both teams are eliminated from the playoffs. It's cold. We have DTR out there, over under 39.5. Dolphins favorite at 6.5. I would take the Browns to cover. I don't care who wins. I'll pick the Dolphins because they're technically a better team, but it will be cold here, so we all know how that will be for Tua. I see like a 13-9 type of game, and I'll pick the Dolphins to edge it out.
Yeah. I feel like the Dolphins have to edge it out because DTR and the Browns are trying to lose, but this feels like a 13-6 type of game. Like you have Tyreek Hill break out, make a big play here, maybe get a play from HN, but the Dolphins have just been so horrifically bad in the cold. I just don't see them going to Cleveland and absolutely dominating the Browns in this situation. So give me the Browns in this game to play competitive. I think they can cover with Miami, and then Miami just grinds out a meaningless win.
Yeah, I agree. And then last of the 4 o'clock slates, we have the Vikings hoisting Green Bay in a huge matchup of the NFC North. Vikings obviously looking for that number one seed potentially, and the Packers, who you anointed as the team to potentially beat the Chiefs if they made it all the way to the Super Bowl. Two teams that are juggernauts in the NFC. Who will be the biggest of juggernauts in this game? Vegas doesn't know. Split on who is the favorite in this game. Over under a 48.5. Jordan Love versus Sam Darnold.
Yeah, Jordan Love versus Sam Darnold. And this game is really tough. And I feel like this is going to be the best game of the week. And my God, you flexed this game to the 4 o'clock slate to prime time here. And then we only have two 4 o'clock games, but one of them is Miami and Cleveland. So there's really only one game to watch at 4 o'clock. And we can all just sit back, relax, and enjoy the magic that is going to be the Minnesota Vikings and the Green Bay Packers playing, because this will be the closest game to a playoff preview that we're probably going to see this week, where you have Jordan Love, Toyotathon Jordan Love, coming in on a hot streak here on a mission. And last time the Minnesota Vikings ended up edging it out versus the Green Bay Packers and they got the win here. But I feel like this Packers team right now is on a mission. And while the Vikings have been picking it up as of late, feel like we've said this a lot, but the Vikings are actually due for a loss in this game. This is the one game you can point to where it's like this is a tough divisional game. They may just split with the Green Bay Packers this year, which is formidable. And then the Packers are going to go ahead and restore balance in the NFC as it should be. It's like it should not be the Minnesota Vikings at the number one seed. And you've played great this year with Sam Darnold. We've all loved to see Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison strive, but Jordan Love, please just reset balance in the NFC. And I feel like that's what we're going to see. If I trust one person in this game between Jordan Love or Sam Darnold to have that clutch drive at the end of the game, and get it done. I feel like it's going to be the Packers, especially with how that Detroit versus Green Bay game went. It was fast paced, it was high scoring, and it just came down to who had the ball last in this game. And this game could very well come down to it, but I feel like Jordan Love and Matt LaFleur are going to end up getting it done, restore balance in the NFC, and really cement themselves in that 5 seed.
Yeah, I think the Vikings, I love what I've seen from them this year. Defensively, they've been great. Offensively, with Justin Jefferson, obviously Sam Darnold as well. But the Packers, this happens every year where, at least in the Jordan Love era, where the last 5, 6 games, you really see Jordan Love start to come along. He doesn't throw the careless interceptions that you would see in the beginning of the season. I think they're a team that is horrifying, where they went on this run. They beat the Cowboys this past year, and I feel like this year they're better now with Josh Jacobs than Aaron Jones. As much as I love Aaron Jones, so it's going to be great. I'm going to pick the Packers to win this game too. I do think it's going to be super close. Could come down to a field goal by Mr. Andy's Carlson himself, but super competitive NFC North game. Some reason the North divisions just know how to play football in these type of games. So I'll take the Packers. They restore balance and move to 12-4
Yeah, be a fun game though.
for sure. And then Sunday Night Football, we have the battle of Michael Penix and Jaden Daniels, Falcons Commanders. What could have been the Kirk Cousins reunion in Washington, but instead we will see Mr. Michael himself. Washington is favored at 4.5, over under 47.5. And it feels like to me that the Washington Commanders, had a bit of a lull. They lost 3 straight games to the Eagles and Cowboys and Steelers. They've won 3 straight games. They look like they're playing some good football. They started scoring points again. They beat up and defeated the Eagles in a historic last second moment. And I feel like in this game, I see them doing the same, beating on the Falcons. Michael Penix is in his second start. I do think we're going to start to see him start to piece things together. But overall, Commanders are hungrier. They're looking for seeding in the playoffs. So I'm going to take the Commanders to win. I think they win. I'll say I'm going to say 27-17.
Yeah, 27-17 is a good score because we saw some good things from Michael Penix, but he didn't have like gaudy numbers in that first game, and he's still trying to find himself in the NFL. So it's going to be a tough environment to just step into a scene versus the Washington Commanders, who are probably flying off the biggest win that they've had in the past 5 years. I mean, going out there, beating the Philadelphia Eagles to put yourself in a secure position in the playoff picture where you can really separate yourself from the field. And then Jane Daniels throwing for 5 touchdowns. They carry that momentum into this game. And with Michael Penix, I feel like we'll see some good things, see some poise, but I feel like we're going to start to see some mistakes. Could see a Frankie Louvu interception, but I'm curious to see what the Falcons do in this game because if Michael Penix comes out and then he starts to ball a little bit, and then the Falcons offense has a little bit of juice, I'd be like, okay, maybe this team can go out there and compete with the Minnesota Vikings in the first round if they end up winning the division and making the playoffs here. So I think this could be a very telling game for the Falcons, but right now, just gonna ride with the hotter hand with the Washington Commanders and Jane Daniels.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. That'll be a fun matchup. We'll see how it pans out. And then the last game is Monday Night Football. We have Detroit versus San Fran. San Fran was eliminated from the playoffs this past week, and Detroit is still vying for that number 1 seed with the Lions and Eagles breathing down their necks. Lions have had their best season this season with Jared Goff, who putting him in the MVP race. We have Jameer Gibbs, who's been playing great for them. I feel like knowing the Detroit Lions team and how it's been with Dan Campbell, this is one of those games that they've had circled on their calendar all season long because of what happened in the NFC title game, blowing that huge lead. They want vengeance. They're hungry. They're determined. They are a cohesive unit. Even with their defensive woes that they've had with all the injuries, I just feel like with the 49ers injuries, with the Detroit tenacity that they've played with all season, I am going to pick Detroit to blow out the 49ers. I think that they're going to come in hungry, rip them apart, and I see a 31-14 level game coming ahead.
Yeah, 41 to 13 level game would be great in this game. And it's good because the 49ers are a really one dimensional team right now. They don't really have a running game. You had your fourth string running back that you picked up at Foot Locker get hurt at this game. And then you have the end of the game versus the Chicago Bears. Dan Campbell's in the locker room talking about, hey, man, it is the first time in franchise history we've gone out there and won 13 games. This is the first time that this has ever been accomplished. Like, this is something that we need to look back on and be proud of. And we're going to be like, wow, this was the Detroit Lions team that set the single season record for the most wins in a regular season. And for a team like Detroit, whose franchise really has never been successful or won Super Bowls, like, that's a huge accomplishment for this team, especially with where this franchise was. Like, when people say Dan Campbell's a bad coach because he has he ran a fake punt or he did an onside kick here, or maybe he went for it on fourth down, or maybe he went for two. Like, just look at where this team came from when he got there. They were one of the worst teams in the league. They went three, they went 3-13. They were one of the worst teams in the league, losing six of their first games coming out there one year, then found a way to make the playoffs and end up winning two playoff games and make it to the conference championship ahead of schedule. I feel like with everything that happened, then Dan Campbell's like, all right, we won 13 games, so let's take all of that energy and put it into San Francisco. So it's like everything you said there, they had it circled on their calendar. And that post game speech that Dan Campbell made after that game is like, we're going to take this historic season. We're the Lions. We just had the best season in our franchise's history, and we're going to take all of that out on the poor, injured, beat up San Francisco 49ers. Not a good day to be a Niners fan.
Not a good day at all. But we've covered every game in Week 17 in the NFL. We're in the witching hour of the NFL season, and we'll be here to break it down next week to recap everything that has transpired around the NFL. We talked about the Christmas games. We talked about the Thursday night games. We talked about the MVP race, Lamar Jackson's historic season. But there is one thing that our fellow fans need to know leading into the Week 17 week. And of course, that is the documents being unleashed, talking about the top five teams in the NFL according to the Brickyard.
Yeah, the top five teams in the NFL according to the Brickyard. And, we have a lot of teams that are kind of teetering on this list, but there's really only, I feel, four true contenders in the NFL, and they will all be on this list. They'll all be mentioned on this list, and they'll all be get their true shine. But I feel like with the fifth team on this list, it's not going to be a team that's going to be in the playoffs. It's not going to be a team that is remotely impressive. The thing that's impressive with this team is how much that they've sucked, and we're kind of a bad franchise. We're kind of the bad franchise psychologists on the show. We really break down how to be a successfully bad franchise and when a team is going to turn it around in all of the right signs. And, when you go from, teetering around like the 10th or 15th pick and trying to be competitive, and then suddenly magic strikes, suddenly you have someone like Drew Lock or Jeff Grisco fall out of your lap, and then you cut Daniel Jones. I mean, this team is doing everything right. They're about to go out there and fix the one hole that they've had since Eli Manning, and Eli Manning was part of this hole at the end of this career. But the Giants are actually going to go out there, get the number one pick, and get Shador Sanders. Shador Sanders is talking about, oh, yeah, we already know where we're going. We're going to the New York Giants. I mean, how can this team you successfully built a team that's so bad that it is mathematically impossible to think of a scenario where they win a game unless the Lord steps in himself and resurrects or comes back down to earth and decides that the earth has had its run in the simulation and it's all over, because that's really the only thing that can stop the Giants from clinching the number one pick when you're rolling out someone like Tim Boyle, who you mentioned threw one touchdown in college and played for the great schools of Kentucky and UConn, not known for football at all. They're known for basketball, similarly to Duke. I mean, it's like the Giants can't learn their lesson. Maybe don't bring in a guy where played at a school where they're named for basketball. Then we brought in Drew Lock. What's next? Brock Osweiler is going to be your starting quarterback next year because you need two first round draft picks, and then you're going to start Nate Peterman. I mean, my God. So at number 5, the Giants, they are so far the best team at tanking this year, and they figured out a formula where they pretty much guaranteed they're going to lose the rest of the games. And that at number 4, I have the Philadelphia Eagles. The Philadelphia Eagles have been one of the best defenses all season. Jalen Carter and Nakobe Dean, who have been two of their best draft picks, have officially showed up here, and they are showing why they were taken so high in the draft. The Philadelphia Eagles, now with players like Reed Blankenship showing up, and then Jalen Hurts had a concussion here. Saquon Barkley has been going off though, and say if Jalen Hurts has a concussion, I feel like he'll be fine in the playoffs. But they went out there, absolutely demoralized a Baltimore Ravens team, and didn't really allow them to do anything at all in that game versus them. So I think at number 4, it's going to be the Philadelphia Eagles. Not in love with their coaching, but I have to respect their defense, and I respect AJ Brown and Saquon Barkley being one of the toughest duos to contain in the league this year as the number 2 seed in the NFC. And that at number 3, are you in the market for a new car? Well, the Packers are in the market for having one of the top quarterbacks in the league when you're looking for a new car, because Jordan Love, the Toyotathon king, no, don't talk to me about your Honda Monday, your Honda Thon, whatever you want to talk, like only Toyotathon for Green Bay fans right now. And Jordan Love, after Thanksgiving, he's had a similar run that Joe Burrow had those past few years, where in November and December, he was virtually unstoppable after Thanksgiving. And that's the most telling thing when you drop 35 points in 10 degrees. Tua, take notes, because this guy absolutely put on a demolition where he can make some of the most impressive throws. Doesn't matter if it's sub-degree temperatures. This is going to be in this playoffs one of the guys that we look at as one of the next great quarterbacks in the league. Everyone was rushing to anoint CJ Stroud, talk about Anthony Richardson or Trevor Lawrence. People are talking about Justin Herbert here. Well, as far as getting to that 5th spot where you kind of have Mahomes, Lamar, Josh Allen in that top 4 there, like someone needs to knock on the door and punch themselves into top 5. And I feel like Jordan Love is going to be that quarterback to do it. You look at his numbers in November and December the past few years, what he did to absolutely demolish the Cowboys, and he almost beat San Francisco in the second round. I feel like the Packers are ready to absolutely ruin someone's season this year. And I feel like they're going to have a great shot to get to the conference championship. And we're going to see a third matchup of them in Detroit this year to decide who goes to the Super Bowl. So I think at number 5, at number 3, we have the Green Bay Packers. And then at number 2, back with this week in the top 5 at number 2, we have the Detroit Lions. They finally got back to number 2, and they had the most wins in franchise history this year. And then you had Jared Goff absolutely dicing up the Bears defense, who did a fake stumble, the first fake stumble play, where the play started out at practice. And Ben Johnson walks up to Jared Goff and he's like, "Do you think you could fumble the ball and pick it back up?" Jared Goff just looks at him, "Are you absolutely nuts and off your rocker right now? What are you talking? Can I fumble the ball and pick it back up?" But it turned into that. And then they worked out a stumble play where Jameer Gibbs dives for the ball, and then you get a wide open strike for Sam Laporta. It's just like things like this is what I've been saying all season, where I'm like, I think Ben Johnson is the best offensive coordinator in the NFL. The Lions offense has the most creativity, whether it's the trick plays that they have, faking a stumble here, and their defense has had injuries, but it's also held up here. They give up a lot of big plays, but they play well enough where they can bend but not break. And when you have an offense that's that good with Jamison Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown, people don't talk about them enough as potentially the best wide receiver duo in the league. Are either of them the best receiver in the league? But Amon-Ra works his tail off, and Jamison Williams is one of the most athletic receivers in the league. And then you have Laporta. You still have Jameer Gibbs there and one of the most powerful offensive lines. People still don't give this team enough credit. So at number two, have the Detroit Lions with their finally most wins in franchise history, which they should have had last year. We all know they had 13 wins last year, but the Cowboys game, we won't talk about it anymore. But at number one, the team that just had the Christmas magic, the team that kind of put a lot of coal in people's stocking on Christmas, where they're like, okay, maybe we're finally going to see some cracks in the armor. We're going to see a chink in the armor for the Kansas City Chiefs where you can finally say, okay, maybe they can be exposed here. Maybe the Steelers will have the finishing touches to really show why this Kansas City Chiefs team can be beaten. I mean, they haven't scored over 30 points all year, and all that game was is people realizing, wait a minute, Hollywood Brown is coming back. Wait a minute, they have Isaiah Pacheco, Kareem Hunt, and Samaje Perine, who had some big moments versus the Kansas City Chiefs with the Cincinnati Bengals. He's an underrated player who has playoff experience. And then you have a hungry DeAndre Hopkins, who at the end of his career, one of the things he needs is just a ring. And everyone knows he's just gonna have one of those magical games in the playoffs. And then Travis Kelsey can muster up enough to be effective. And then it really helps too when holding isn't a penalty on the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, their offensive line never holds. Holding isn't a thing with the Kansas City Chiefs, which helps a lot when you're going up against the best pass rushers in the NFL, but also your defense. It's been one of the best defenses in the league this year. And while you haven't been lighting people up, Patrick Mahomes just effortlessly is like, okay, I haven't had 300 yards and three touchdowns in a minute, but this game was the first time watching the Kansas City Chiefs all year where I felt like their offense was just going to get every single play. They were going to dominate the game, and then they were going to be able to get a touchdown or score whenever they wanted to whoever Patrick Mahomes wanted to get the touchdown. And I feel like this game put a lot of coal in the haters' stockings who's like, oh, Patrick Mahomes is a bottom 10 quarterback this year. I mean, we got some of the dumbest takes. And if you want to out yourself, like, I shouldn't talk about football, is if your hot take is that the Kansas City Chiefs are going to fall off and that Patrick Mahomes is the top five quarterback. So, because the statistics and the numbers are all that matters, like, okay, yeah, numbers do matter, but they also matter in the playoffs. The amount of rings that you have matters here. And it's like, I'm not opposed to witnessing greatness in my time. And if I get to see Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes back to back, I can say I watched a successful life of NFL football. And then also seeing Steph Curry and then seeing someone like Victor Wembanyama in the same era who may take off and be the face of the NBA. It's like those are some pretty spectacular talents. So when you're witnessing greatness, just sit back and enjoy it because the Kansas City Chiefs are on their way to potentially get to and win their third Super Bowl. So reclaiming their spot at number one, the Kansas City Chiefs.
Bravo. The Brickyard. Top five teams entering week 17 with the hated but greatest Kansas City Chiefs on pace for potentially the first three-peat in NFL history, with the Lions,
Yeah.
Packers trailing behind them.
Trailing behind, yeah, it should be a fun playoff run, but I'm excited to watch all these teams except for the Giants play in the top five in the playoffs here. But when we're done with the season, we're just doing top fives of random things. We have to do top five worst internets. Like we have to go on like Glassdoor. We have to go like find some reviews. But like, how's like Cox like? Why are internet companies allowed to just monopolize a certain region of an area? It makes no sense at all.
I'm going to do a top five list that is less gay than Cox Internet. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do top five things that are less gay than Cox. And it's going to be things like
Freddie
sparkles and
Mercury,
glitter and Freddie Mercury,
Elton John,
Harry Styles. Yeah, Harry Styles, LeBron
Caleb
James,
Williams.
Diddy.
Well, maybe not Caleb
Caleb
Williams, but
Williams, exactly. We'll see. We got to keep the worst top 5 and the best top 5s. They will be, honestly, that'll probably just be the entire show for the next 6 months once when football's over.
yeah, just worst top fives and best top fives of something. We could do like a worst top five and a best top five. If we're talking about movies, like worst top five Disney movies, worst Disney movies from the 2000s, Country Bears.
There's a lot of really bad ones.
Yeah,
It's most of them. It's mostly bad. But we'll talk about that all mainly for this week, week 17, the witching hour of the NFL season, the best and brightest we will see on display. The NBA is heating up as well, as long as the NFL doesn't steal it again. But most importantly, message of all that we'll carry with us as we enter into the new year. Stay brick, baby.
stay brick. Made it
God damn
through.
it, that fucking